Korea, in Japan, in Taiwan, in the Philippines, Indonesia, East Timor. There's so many people who have feared to tell their histories.
Right. And your world, 지유티비.
네, 여러분 안녕하세요. 여러분께 유익한 소식을 전해드리는 지유티비의 지유입니다. 네, 여러분 지난번 영상에서 미국 코네티컷 대학교 역사학과 교수님이신 알렉시스 Dudden 교수님과의 인터뷰를 전해드렸는데요. 이번에는 그 2부 인터뷰 내용을 가지고 왔습니다. 정말 이번 하버드 램지어 교수가 이번 위안부 할머니들의 문제에 대해서 이렇게 역사를 왜곡하는 그런 학술적 글을 펴낸 것이 왜 문제가 되고 있으며 그것이 얼마나 희생자들한테는 큰 아픔이자 얼마나 씻을 수 없는 상처 인지 그리고 이렇게 잘못된 주장, 정말 거짓말이라고 말할 수밖에 없는 이런 잘못된 주장에 대해서 이렇게 각계 그리고 각층 특히나 학자분들이 열심히 싸워주시고 있는 그 이유에 대해서 이 알렉시스 더든 교수님의 얘기를 들으면서 우리가 좀 파악해 볼 수 있을 것 같아 이번 인터뷰 영상 2부를 준비했습니다. 네, 여러분 끝까지 시청해 주시고요. 저는 이렇게 진실에 다가가는 여러분께 정말 도움이 되는 그리고 어디에서도 들을 수 없는 얘기를 전해드리는 그런 유튜버가 되기 위해 노력하겠습니다. 여러분들 감사합니다. 그럼 인터뷰 영상 끝까지 봐주세요. 여러분 안녕.
So I'm not sure what's going on in terms of motivation, and I won't say until I know. Not because I'm afraid of anything, but I just honestly don't know. And that's the difference. I can have an opinion about it, but I would never publish what I think might be going on until I'm 100% certain, because that's what scholarly credibility rests on. Is you got to be 100% sure. And to find out that not only was Professor Ramseyer unsure, but he knew he didn't have any evidence. And so that's what the recent New Yorker piece makes clear, because that piece is fact-checked. Professor Ramseyer was called by the magazine to say, are these your words? He said, yes, these are my words, which say he didn't have evidence. So forgive me for being very confused about this, but people criticizing, those of us who are criticizing the article, claim we're against academic freedom, and that's not the issue at all. We're against lies.
Right. So right. So I studied communications in my master's degree. So I know that like freedom of speech and academical freedom is so important. And, as well as the content of the theory, like its evidence is so important. So in graduate school, we learn both things, right? So we learn like how to like draw the topics, but we also learn like for 2 years and 3 years how to prove that, right? So that is the basic of academical word, and he just broke it. So I think that's a really big problem. Yes.
And I think I'm really glad that you personally understand the rigor that's necessary to make a claim that's factual. And I understand, because we live in this era in which facts are called fake news, it's essential to find out facts that are not there. Something that is actually fake news presenting itself as fact. And I think that's the danger that of the Ramseyer articles in general, because they're already out there. And they're out there by a Harvard professor dressed up as scholarship when in fact they are complete fabrication. And on top of that, he accuses all of the scholars who have demonstrated with a wide range of factual evidence, he accuses all of us of making up the evidence and calls the whole history, quote unquote, pure fiction. And that is another violence on the surviving Halmoni in Korea, in Japan, in Taiwan, in the Philippines, Indonesia, East Timor. There's so many people who have feared to tell their histories.
Right.
And I think that really is the first part that upset a lot of us, because as we well know, the areas in which this history took place in the 1930s and 40s under Japanese occupation and war conditions, then after 1945, these were societies that were and still are, for many parts, very conservative. In many of these countries, YouTube is not even allowed, for example, and so we can't even debate this. And so and then to think about how the survivors found the courage to come forward, beginning with Halmoni Kim Hak-sun in 1991, and get on television. That's an enormously brave act. And to simply dismiss her testimony and the testimony of so many other survivors, and we know how many survivors have not come forward for fear of upsetting their families, for fear of just too much stress. But to deny that their story is not true, when we know that with other evidence, what they are claiming to have had happen to them is true, is such a violence on the still living people who suffered in this history. That is a deeply upsetting part. And compellingly, to me at least, because Professor Ramseyer is a lawyer, if we step back from this, we know that the United Nations named this a crime against humanity in 1996. And so if you just think about crime, doesn't even have to be this history. In crime, you cannot have a crime until you have a perpetrator of the crime. And what Professor Ramseyer's article has also ignored, first he denies the survivors and says they don't tell the truth, which, how does he know? He's never talked to them. He's never, but what he also ignores is the fact that former soldiers of the Japanese Imperial Army of a variety of ethnicities, but beginning in Japan, colonized soldiers as well, but beginning in Japan, have admitted to raping the women in these rape camps, which is the proper way to refer to a so-called comfort station. And so he's ignored the fact that some people have come forward and confessed to having perpetrated the crime many years later. And that's just willful disregard for facts.
Right. It's really heartbreaking because like Halmonis in Korea and many victims like in Asian area, they took this like life-breaking bravery to confess in front of the world. And it's just like easily like ignored. Like that's really heartbreaking and upsetting as one Korean and as a woman. So it's really, really like meaningful thing that we fight for lies, so it's really, I think it's really moving forward movement. So yeah, my last question. So I know you're really busy. So I noticed that like you are really taking actions for lies, especially there are some things like going wrong. So I noticed that when the publication issue in 2014 for like historical textbook in the US, and Japan was forcing to rewrite the history like on the textbook. So you were like fighting at that time as well. And for this time too. So I know that you are fighting for your academical like ethics and your vision. But as a one Korean, I really, really appreciate you. So I'm really wondering, like, is there any motivation that you keep fighting for these like lies or wrongdoings, or is there any like motivation personally for you?
First of all, I have no personal issue with Professor Ramseyer. So this is not an attack on Professor Ramseyer at all. And I think it would sound a little overblown if I said I'm on a crusade for the truth. That would, I'm a historian, I'm a history teacher. But actually, I'm also on the planet in 2021 when there are ongoing instances of similar histories today. Rape camps in different areas of conflict that are today. And that's the most important thing that the survivors, especially the survivors in South Korea, because they have such good support groups, they themselves have traveled to meet today's victims of these crimes. 2017, when Gil Won-ok traveled to Berlin to meet with the survivor of an ISIS rape camp, That's what the important part of learning this history is about. There's history. And so as historians, as academics, we study the system to learn how it unfolded in order to be able to recognize similar patterns happening today. Boko Haram in Nigeria, when it captured the schoolgirls and held them captive and raped them. That's what we're talking about here, is the ongoing instances of targeted violence against women. And I think it's also important that we say girls, we say boys, but legally that's a category of a minor child, which all nations have signed treaties to ban the targeting of minor children in wartime. And so we really need to understand that the reason we take seriously still living victims of this horrible history 75, 80 years ago is because of the truly unfortunate reality that this is still going on, and we have to work together to put a stop to it.
Right. Gianni mentioned you that you are doing this, I quote, not to abuse history by weaponizing it for present purposes, right? So it was really, really impressive. And now I know the meaning, like by talking to you personally, and it's really great, like having conversation with you, and it's so touching, you know.
No, but thank you so much for your interest, because I think what matters is that we still collectively have a chance to learn from the few living survivors who want to tell their story, remembering always that there are many others who never wanted to share, but they have this common bond. And to learn from them and to dignify their suffering before they die is, I think, our responsibility. At least that's the responsibility for me.
Right. Oh my God.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.